Hi, everybody. This is Ukraine, Voices from Within. My name is Anna Sazonov, and I'm here with Maxim Panchenko. So, kind of crazy story. We're cousins. We never met in person, but the war in Ukraine kind of brought us together and kind of brought us to talk about what's happening and literally share with you more about what's happening in Ukraine. And we decided to just record a podcast and bring you voices from Ukraine, but not Ukrainian voices, but people that chose to drop everything that they have in their life, go to Ukraine, and make a difference. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sorry that it took us a little bit time to record another podcast. As you know, there is a lot of things going on right now in Ukraine, and one of the major things is a lot of blackouts. So people sitting without power for a long time, including my parents. That I posted a reel on Instagram, and I shared like, oh, there was not like pretty cold weather right now in Columbia, South Carolina. And then I spoke with my parents, and they shared it's snowing and we don't have power the entire day. So this is the reality right now in Ukraine. And we have Maxim with us here, and he's in Kiev, as you guys know. And Maxim, like, can you share a little bit? First of all, how are you? How's things? And also, how is it to be with all those blackouts? Like, how's day to day?
Hi, thanks again for having me again on the podcast. So, just to split my answer in a couple of blocks, like what is happening at the front lines, I think I would say a few words about that, and then about the blackouts. So, in the front lines, there was this constant comparison they are doing on the media that what is going on in the East these days is very much like the First World War, the trench war in the northern eastern France or something back in 1914, 1916. So that is, to put things into perspective of how much entrenched this war is in every sense of the word. And the expectation is that there is this still frontline these days because there is so much mud because of the autumn. So everybody expects that in a couple of days, weeks, when there is more frost and the ground is more solid, there will be more news about things going on the ground. So the world needs to keep watching, and to keep supporting Ukraine for what's going to happen in a couple of weeks. In terms of blackouts, yes, that is a major hindrance in the day-to-day life all across Ukraine. I don't think there is any part of Ukraine that isn't subject to the rolling blackouts, and they are very frequent. For you to understand, there are guaranteed, each day guaranteed, there are 3 4-hour long rolling blackouts, which means we would have one in the night, which is not that much of a bother because, most people are sleeping. But then there would be like a blackout in the first half of the working day, and then there would be a blackout immediately after you come from work. So just try to imagine how that impacts the everyday life, because those blackouts, they happen not only in residential areas, but also at offices, also at the infrastructure, buildings, etc., everywhere, except for some critical infrastructure and all across Ukraine. So yes, that is a major hindrance for the economy, for the day-to-day operation of a given person. And yes, I think, and everybody thinks here in Ukraine, the calculation of Putin is to make Ukrainians revolt against Zelensky, against the authorities, to push him to negotiate with the Russians because it is so unbearable to live without electricity. And not
I'm
just
going to pause
electricity.
here. It is so funny. I feel like, okay, we're like already 8 months in the war, and Putin still do not understand Ukrainians.
No.
This is what makes us stronger. Like, nope. You're going to like turn the light off. Don't worry. We're going to continue fighting. This is hilarious.
I think I was telling this to somebody a couple of days back, saying that the only moment that we will go, to protest against Zelensky if he indeed decides to negotiate with Putin in these circumstances. And, everybody would say like, what? You're giving in? And, that way we would take to the streets, but, not in any other case. And everybody also needs to understand that this is not only electricity we're talking about, because most people have like electric heating or electric, like kitchen appliances, everything. So this impacts much more than just having, light in your bulb in every room. So yeah, that's it. We're not sure. I was not even sure that I could join into this podcast today because of the schedule of our outages ahead. And also, I would like to apologize, in advance if I would not be, if I disappear at any given moment of this podcast, because power outages still can happen today at my area. So sorry for that if anything happens.
No, that's good. That's fine. At least we'll know why. And you guys will know why. Imagine a situation that you're like working on your biggest project for school and you don't have enough battery on your computer, and then everything dies because there is no power and like you lost all your work. So this is just like a small minor example of how people try to live, but more major example is people are freezing to death because it's cold right now in Ukraine, and a lot of apartments are still using electricity for that. So they have to find different solutions. Like, for example, my parents and also your mom, probably the heating system is on wood and not necessarily on power. So today we're going to talk about, we have very interesting guests that we want to kind of introduce and also allow him to introduce himself. So Maxim, do you have a few words to share about our guests? And then,
Yes, so we are very glad to welcome our guest today. His name is Christian, who is an American from Tennessee, but he will dwell on that a bit more, I think. So as many foreigners, he came to Ukraine when the war broke out, feeling like, this higher mission, to help Ukrainians. I will let him to say in more detail what specifically he's involved with, because that's a very interesting story. So without further ado, I think I will invite him to take the floor and to start with a brief introduction of his background in the US, of how he came into, how he stumbled into the idea and the need to come to Ukraine in these circumstances, and what he's doing here in Ukraine.
Sweet. Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me. First off, it's a huge honor that you guys are actually interested in kind of what we've been doing and stuff like that. But yeah, my name is Christian from Tennessee. Before the war, I was a personal trainer and did like physical therapy type stuff, strength coaching, working with people with injuries. And then I also was training up for a military program called the 18 X-ray program, which basically you can go from civilian to special forces in the US Army. And so when the war kicked off, I was pretty deep in my training for that. So doing a lot of like, work in the woods, a lot of survival stuff, a little bit of shooting, moving, communicating. But the biggest thing was creating a mindset of like, I'm capable of doing things, especially the special forces. You do a lot of things alone and stuff. And so I think that kind of prepped me to be like, all right, man, like let's go to war, And, but when the war popped off, Zelensky was like, we need people and volunteers. And then I started to see that civilians were being killed. I think the first child died like February 25th. A little girl got shot, I think near Kyiv or something. And I was like, damn, like this is going to be a big deal. And so really quickly I decided, that I want to go over there and I want to help. And I didn't necessarily know what that would look like. I assumed that I would end up fighting somehow. But it's grown to be a bunch of crazy stuff now. So I bought a ticket for early March. I had no contacts, so I called my grandpa, and I knew that he was a missionary in Ukraine for a second. And I was like, hey, do you know anybody? And he was like, yeah, I know this one guy who's going to be driving from Slovakia to Uzhgorod and Beragovo in like Western Ukraine. And he can just drop you off on someone's doorstep. And so that's exactly what happened. I linked up with him. He dropped me off, this great dude named Zsolti with Eastern European Outreach. He took me into his home. And then I started an organization while I was living with them to raise money for a vehicle, purchased that vehicle, and then I immediately started doing evacs. But that whole time I was looking for a way to fight, but I was in touch with foreign volunteers, and a lot of guys were dying really early on in the war. And so I definitely wanted to like find my bearing and stuff. And so I ended up doing that. And yeah, that's how I got to Ukraine. But I guess the main reason why I went to Ukraine, and let me know if you guys want me to like talk about something different, but
no, that was, I was about to jump in and ask you why.
Yeah.
So that was
Okay.
a great segue. Thank you.
Yeah. The main reason, well, okay. So I think I told you this earlier, like literally any reason you can think to go to Ukraine and help, like that's it. That's a good reason. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, there's such a need, and there's so much you can do. You know, and so there's so many reasons I went to Ukraine, and so many reasons I stayed there for so long. But I'd say it was the first time in my life that I felt empathy for others in a really big way. So Ukraine actually ended up helping me, in my opinion, more than I helped Ukraine. I wasn't in like the best place, and I felt pretty purposeless in certain areas of my life. And so Ukraine kind of gave me that, you know. But you know, my mom raised me to be a protector, you know, to be like a good man, but also good at being a man, you know. And like when women and children are in danger, it's a man's job to rise up and like put himself in the line of fire, you know. And so I just felt like a huge sense of guilt if I wouldn't have gone to Ukraine. You know, it's like my duty to go there. I don't know why it was Ukraine specifically, because like there's stuff happening all over the world, but something with the Ukraine, you know, this like Russian Ukrainian conflict that really tugged on my heart, and you know, brought me over there. And then I just ended up completely falling in love with the country. So
One of the things that we kind of like talked back and forth is about freedom. And you're a big believer in freedom, and kind of the freedom of Ukraine hooked you up. So like, tell us more a little bit about that, and what's freedom for you?
Yeah. Well, so when you have freedom, you have the freedom to do something. And coming from America, you know, like we're all about freedom. We are free, thankfully, because the people who helped create America really did a great job. And that's why it lasts for so long. But in America currently, we don't have to get into all the politics, but it does seem like things are becoming less free. It seems like things are becoming much more polarized, where if someone voted for this person, then they're like immediately the devil, you know? And so there's not like a sense of community. There's not a sense of like being an American and like a pride that comes with that. And yeah, and so, you know, when I went to Ukraine, I kind of found that, you know, and I'm not just like drinking the Kool-Aid, right? I'm not just like a fanboy of Ukraine just to be a fanboy of Ukraine at all. Because there's, you know, in war, there's,
Although
good,
your
there's bad, there's
Ukrainian
ugly.
is, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in because it was funny. Your Ukrainian is very, very well. And you just started learning Ukrainian. And it's like, good job, because Ukrainian is a very difficult language. Це дуже приємно. Слухати
Дякую. Дуже вам дякую.
Yeah, keep going. Sorry, I had to like jump into
Дуже
that.
гарно.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I appreciate it. Thank you. I've taken 3 lessons, and I've just put myself in positions where like I had to speak a language that's not English, you know? And so Russian and Ukrainian, I've been trying to just like get into that, that vibe, mainly Ukrainian though, because it's way prettier than Russian. But I don't like Ukraine just because of the hype or just because of social media. And I'm not like completely in love with Zelensky. You know, I'm still learning about who everyone is and who your country is and the government, what's going on. But in Ukraine, there's just this aura of like, we have our mindset that's like a shared mindset throughout the whole country, where your freedom, you didn't have it for a long time, and then you got it. And so it's very fresh, you know, that you guys understand that freedom is not free. And, you know, that it's such a privilege to be free. It's such an awesome thing, and you need to capitalize on it and take advantage of it to make the world a better place, to make your country better, to make your children better, to just build yourself and everything, and not just be complacent. And so that's intoxicating as an American who is free. And doesn't really see that in my communities, where people are taking advantage of their freedom constantly. Right. America, I think we're still the freest place on earth. Yes. And we're a great country, incredibly strong, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, people in Ukraine are just taking advantage of their freedom, and they actually understand what's going on. And it's that mindset is like getting into your kids too, which is awesome. You know, like there are some teenagers there who I'm talking to, and they might be dumb and chasing, you know, stupid things in life. They just want to play video games or whatever, but like they still have like this thing in the back of their mind where they're like, there's a reason why we're fighting, you know, and there's a reason why, you know, our men need to be strong, and there's a reason why we need to do these things and have these disciplines and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And for me, that's just so attractive, you know? And so.
Yeah, I mean, I get it very well. And when we're talking about your experiences in Ukraine and the geography you went to, I mean, like as far as I understand, there has been a couple of places that you've been along the front line. There have been several like areas you have been operating in. Can you dwell a little bit on the timeline of that, and maybe attach some human stories to that? What horrible cases you saw for the Americans and for, you know, any other listeners who may have to understand, like to have faces to the story and, you know, to understand what's going on?
Yeah. So one thing that I think should be noted is, since I am a foreigner, I'm not really communicating with these people, since it is such an intimate interaction. It's not time for me to practice my Ukrainian when we're getting shot at, you know, and like me trying to work with these people. So like usually it's always I'm assisting with my skills and with my vehicles and stuff like that to get in. But when we're getting the people and we're in like such like a hot spot, those stories aren't necessarily shared with me. And so I don't have as many as I've like, so like I've been a part of evacuating like thousands of people, probably like over 3,000 people in the course of the past 8 months. And there's so many stories with all those people and some really traumatic things, but I didn't necessarily get to hear all those stories, which is unfortunate, but I'm sure as time goes, I will. So timeline, got to Ukraine, took a wee bit, maybe a few weeks to get a vehicle, got the vehicle, brought some humanitarian aid to Kyiv, while a little bit past Bravery to a village, I think called Bobrik, and or something like that. And Russians had been there like 16 hours, and then they had been pushed out. And then we went into the village and brought them a bunch of humanitarian aid. So we were the first ones to bring them soap and food and things like that. And that was incredibly eye-opening for me, that like these people went without, you know, for a good bit. And you know, Russia really, they took those initial villages around like that, those first 3 or 4 days, they got really close to Kyiv, right? And then they took so much ground. And so these people weren't prepped, they weren't ready, you know? And so going to a liberated village like that was pretty impactful on me, seeing a bunch of, you know, people who could be my grandmother, you know, like begging me for soap, and men like asking for razors, and people asking for diapers and just clean water. And so that was a big deal. That really opened my eyes to a lot of things. After that, I ended up doing evacuations from Balaklia while it was occupied. So Balaklia in Kharkiv Oblast, there was a church in Poltava and called the Bread of Life. We basically would just go in with vans early in the morning. We'd leave at like 4 a.m., 5 a.m. from Poltava and get to Balaklia around like 9-ish, 10-ish. And because that is the front line. And then you go into the gray zone, and basically people would hide at a gas station, like 50 of them or 60 of them in the gray zone. And, you know, if we went a little bit further, the Russians could see us and we could see them. But we did our best to stay as, you know, hidden as we could. And these people, you know, they would some of them, I guess, like come out of the woods, get them through the gas station, and women, children, old, like, you know, babushkas, didushkas, and we throw them in the back of the sprinters and just fly out of there. You know, like my Mercedes Sprinter had 12 seats, but we put 30 people, 35 people in it at one point, just cramming them in there. And then we would distribute them once we got to a safer location. But that was a big deal for me because Chechens occupied Balaklia, and or they were there at a certain point, and Chechens are absolutely brutal. And so, you know, a lot of the kids that we saw, they wouldn't even cry. They were just frozen. and they had like this 1,000-yard stare, and that was when I really realized, like, okay, like, in this war, like, rape victims are real, and it is occurring pretty often, and people are being tortured, and brought into basements and getting hooked up to car batteries and stuff. And in Balaklia, a lot of that happened, unfortunately. People would disappear. We heard really terrible stories. And then from Balaklia, I went south in Kharkiv Oblast, like Petrivsky, Protopopivka, and just did evacs there and brought a bunch of humanitarian aid. But then things with evacuations really started to pick up when I went to Lysychansk and like Siversk and stuff like that. And so when Lysychansk wasn't occupied, we were running there doing evacs. That was interesting because it's deep in Donbass versus in Kharkiv. And in Donbass, you do have, like, predominantly Russian speakers. You have some sort of like sympathizers down there, and you have to be careful who you're talking to, and what's going on. You have to be aware of your surroundings. Actually, one of the teams while we were there, they're passing out humanitarian aid, I guess. And this old man basically just pulled a grenade on them and tried to blow them up. Tried to blow up a group of volunteers. Thankfully they were able to tackle him, bring him to the ground, plug the grenade, and nothing really happened. But, that was when I was like really woken up to, like, all right, cool. This is like, as a foreigner, you can't just be walking around like, oh, I'm from America, I'm a volunteer, like you actually need to like be much more turned on, and and so worked in Lysychansk as long as we could. And then one day we got the call not to go in, and the next day it was occupied. Unfortunately, actually, there was a group of volunteers who went in that day, and they're still in Russian occupied territory. So the day that Lysychansk got occupied, since then they were first captured, and they got released with no documents, and they're somewhere in occupied territory trying to get across somehow without dying. From there, I worked up in liberated territories. I've been working in Bakhmut for a long time. I was there whenever we would bring people to Bakhmut from the front, and now, of course, Bakhmut is the front. Working in, like, near Donetsk city. We've been shot at a bunch, been targeted by tanks, shelled a ton. I know all the sounds, I know how to differentiate everything. I know where they're going to, like, not where they're going to land exactly, but I know what's close, what's not. Yeah, I've seen a lot of stuff. In liberated territory, actually, one thing that really got me, whenever that big Kharkiv offensive really pushed through, we got access immediately, and we were in Liman 4 hours after Russians were pushed out of Liman. And, one thing people don't talk about with liberated territory is that while you're in occupied territory, Russians really don't provide you with the best medical care, depending on like where you are location wise, right? Like if you're in a village that's not near like a major city in occupied territory, you're probably not able to get to the hospital, and especially if you're alone, like if your kid's left and you're just some babushka living there alone, and you have some illness or disease where you needed medication and you can't get that anymore, your disease is just going to kind of fester, And so there were a lot of cases of people with cancer where their cancer wasn't able to be treated. And so you just saw pieces of their body rotting, just eating itself away, and one thing that really sticks with me is we got a call to go to this one person's house in a village way past Liman. I forgot the name of it, but we showed up and went inside, and the whole right side of her face had basically just eaten itself away. So her eyeball was like black. She was bleeding constantly from her face. You could see her teeth. It looked like, when you're looking in an anatomy book and they show you like the inside of like what the tissue looks like and this and that. And that was a really common occurrence, with people who just have cancer. Things just start rotting away. People with shrapnel wounds that got them from whenever Russians either were pushed out or took the village, those shrapnel wounds are just old and the flesh is rotting. And I don't have to get into it a ton, but that was a really sad thing to see in liberated territory. I've done so much over the past 8 months that it's difficult to really like go through it in waves because you're just so busy almost every single day going out into Bakhmut, Soledar, Bakhmutsky, just, working all these villages along the front, trying to get as many people out as we could.
So we interviewed many people, and I came across with many volunteers and heard stories. And I was on the Ukrainian border volunteering, welcoming the refugees. The majority of the time, we did not hear the stories that you just shared right now. And I'm just curious, how does it make you feel? Because it's scenarios that, I don't know, and I'm putting in quotes, normal people not seeing. It's like, how do you feel? How did it make you feel when you saw that, or after that, to process that, to come back to, you share at one point that you feel numb to everything.
In the reminder, in the moment, it was a good reminder of why I do what I do. Like I said, I have like a protector gene, as cheesy as it sounds. And it's just like, I absolutely hate seeing innocent people who just want to live their lives getting caught up in things like this, and for me as an occupation, I want to be a part of a community who goes out and does things that, they do the dirty work so that other people and their grandmothers and their families and their children can just live their lives, and so it was a really, really, really solid reminder of why I do what I do, and yeah, I hate seeing innocence, and purity being ripped away, like especially with children, like seeing kids with shrapnel wounds and stuff, and just like they've lost a lot of their innocence. They're no longer kids, they have to grow up from being like 4 years old and getting shelled. They know the sounds better than I do, and so no, it affects you, a little bit. I just tried to use it as like this is a reminder, this is a reminder, this is a reminder. But yeah, if you're asking about like PTSD and stuff, I don't think I really have any. I have nightmares sometimes of like, it's weird, like, yeah, just like situations I've been in before where like I didn't think, I was really going to survive, and like it just kind of replays sometimes. But I think my biggest thing is like, coming home to America, it's such a different thing where like in Ukraine, you go from being in Bakhmut, you go to Dnipro to fix your vehicle. And then like people in Dnipro, they're still at war. Like the civilians are still like, there's a tribal mentality of like, they see you with mud all over your body and like blood or whatever, and you're getting a coffee and it's like normal, but here in America, like, it's like, take off your combat boots, put on your jeans, and go get a coffee and be normal. And it's such a different change. And so I kind of feel like an alien coming back to America, but no, I mean,
what is interesting for me, interesting for me, especially, is maybe not, well, we have talked about your experiences, about your attitude, I mean, like about your record and geography in Ukraine. But what I also would like to learn is your impression of the sentiments of Ukrainians, because you're, like a person from the outside, and you can like, you can follow the dynamics of these sentiments, of these emotions, like being a foreigner. So maybe you have a more objective impression. So, and you have been there probably like most of the time, like 8-9 months, which is, almost the entire war. So do you have an impression that the sentiments of Ukrainians are changing? Are we still as mobilized as we should be for the victory? Maybe, you can have a couple of words about where we should go, where we should, on what we should focus, at this stage of the war.
Like Ukrainians?
Yes.
This is general. I think you can't, I don't know. And you guys may just immediately kick me off the podcast for saying this, but a lot of people I noticed in like the civilian sector of Ukraine, they were like, I'm trying so hard to find a new normal. And in my mind, if my country was at war for my freedom, where like the country has a shot at like taking over my country, like if they take out the whole energy grid, they start just throwing bombs everywhere, and it's like I have to leave my country for the rest of my life. While that war is going on, I'm not going to try to find a new normal. The new normal is war. It's not me just trying to live through it. And so I think it's super important, especially for the young people in Ukraine, that they stay like on top of things. You know, they're constantly like even just reposting on social media, getting people donations, right, to purchase new vehicles, to purchase kit, to purchase socks for the soldiers. But then also like educating their friends and staying up to date on what's going on and not letting it happen just like way off in Donbass, where most Ukrainians have never gone, you know, who live in the West and who live in Kyiv and stuff. And so, yeah, I think like as a people, it's just super important to I don't know. I mean, and you guys can probably speak to this. Of course, you can speak to this better, but it's like in 2014 up until the invasion, wasn't it like an 8-year war that was happening? And it wasn't like really on the forefront of everyone's mind. Am I wrong when I say that? Or
Well, we got. I think that is the place from which this search for the new normal came from. Because if the war had just started on the 24th of February and that was like the thing from scratch, everybody would still be focused on the war predominantly. But we have this history of the 8-year long war. So and because that war was so like slow going, if that makes any sense, as compared to the phase since February 24th. So Ukrainians did not have any choice but, to adjust, to try to find a way to live alongside it, because it was that was so slow of a conflict. So, which is why I think Ukrainians are trying to revitalize that habit during this hot phase of the war, to try and apply the same to this new stage.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I will jump in to say, as somebody that lived in Israel the majority of our life, we've been suffering from terror attacks and wars and military operation always, constantly, like all the time. And one of the things that we also got used to live beside the terror attacks. And if you stop living, and if you stop doing the normal things, they won. So if Ukraine will stop and focus 100% on the war and not continue living their life, and Ukrainians not going to adapt to the new reality, basically Putin won, because he wants to erase everything and stop everything. So it's kind of to keep the spirit, duch, Ukrainsky duch, to keep the Ukrainian spirit going. And that's what makes us so brave and so unique, because we're not going to stop. We're going to adapt to the situation, keep going, keep showing the world how brave are we.
Yeah,
so this is kind of different perspective, but there is something what you're saying, that especially with the difference between the East and the West of Ukraine kind of like being a little bit more disconnected. And I know that a lot of volunteers do not like to go to Lviv or some parts of Kyiv, because they're like, oh, those are the party cities and nobody knows that a war is happening there and people are getting very disconnected. But we need to look at this as a whole, as Ukraine, because you need still economy to keep running. You need still people to communicate with the rest of the world. So it's kind of like a yes and situation.
Exactly. So, I agree.
And I think there are going to be like so many studies and papers that people are going to write about the Ukrainian spirit and this war. So another interesting question for you. What's next? What's next for you?
Why did you have to ask me that question? So I go back in January because I rescued a dog from Solidar and I want to take her back to the United States. Her name's Dara, and she needs surgery that the United States can provide her. And I just needed to figure out some passport stuff. But no, I mean, if I had already served in the U.S. military and did my 5-year contract that I've always wanted to do, I wouldn't be home right now. I would have sold every single thing and moved, gotten a cabin in the Carpathian Mountains, and then be working in Donbass constantly. And I believe that 100%. That's not me just being like, whatever. But I need the training that the U.S. can provide under my belt. And so I'm most likely going to come back here in January, late January or February, and put everything on hold and then sign my contract. After that, I'll go back to Ukraine. Hopefully, of course, the war will be over by then. But then I'd like to live in Ukraine, and begin, I guess, my civilian life there.
Everybody would like to be part of Ukraine once, kind of like a resolution will come to the country, and we'll go to the new normal of Ukraine.
I've been on the front too long. We're always talking about bombing the Kremlin. My bad.
Well, Maxim, do you have any additional questions? Because I have the final question to ask.
Okay, should.
So do you have anything else to share with our audience? Do you want to, what's your message? What you want our audience to take from this podcast and from your experience?
I guess if this podcast is like for foreigners, right? Like English speaking countries and stuff. I'd say for the men, like if you really want purpose and you really want to help currently in like obviously you can do it in a bunch of different ways, but it's like currently if you want to assist and you want to, I just have so many friends back home. So like for me personally, this is like my message for all my friends and all these people who say that they don't have purpose and they're curious what they're going to do with their lives. And they're like young men, even young women, like go volunteer somewhere and do something that matters for people who need it, and especially for men. War is terrible, but it's for men, and like people can argue with me all the time on that. I may just be like some weird masculinity guru, whatever, but I really think that, young men need to actually understand what's going on in Ukraine, and, and that you can actually find a lot of yourself by doing these things, and, I don't know. I just like, it's, oh man, I could talk about it for hours, but like, I think young men are so callous to a lot of things because of technology and because of video games, and we just become numb to a lot of things, and we're constantly getting dopamine, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And, if you go somewhere where it's like intimate and humans have to be human and you can't just hide behind a bunch of things, you learn a lot about yourself and you learn a lot about other people, and it really changes your life, like, for example, for me, I'm not really like a big lovey-dovey guy. Before I went to Ukraine, the August before Ukraine, my best friend died. We were climbing and he fell off the side of a mountain that we were climbing, and I did my best to save him, but I couldn't. And so after that, my heart just like froze. But while I was in Ukraine, I saved this little girl and her mother from Chiguv near Kharkiv, like near Kharkiv city. And we brought them to Poltava, and then we eventually brought them all the way to Hungary. But I fell in love with this little 7-year-old girl. She like slowly just like took the ice away from my heart, like with a little chisel, just by like small interactions that we had hanging out, long road trip, all the way across Ukraine. And so, yeah, I guess my message would just be like, go do big things. It's not like too much, and trust yourself and allow the experience to change you. And it's going to make you more than you were. I've seen a shit ton of death in Ukraine, shit ton of things that I'd never want to see, but I can take those things and say it made me more,
Christian, you definitely inspired me to continue support Ukraine and stand for Ukraine and do more for my country. And it's my country. And it's all the time like fascinating to meet people like yourself that literally put your life at a daily risk to save people, and to guarantee them a better place. And I hope that in the future our paths are going to cross somehow, while we're doing work to support Ukraine and freedom and democracy. Because as we share all the time on this podcast, Ukraine is not only fighting for Ukraine is fighting for the entire world. Because if Ukraine will fall, we're all going to fall. And then what's the reason to have a democratic country? So this is our opportunity to come together as people that do believe in freedom and democracy and support Ukraine and support the free world. So once again, thank you so much for everything that you're doing for this war, for our people, for the people of the world. Maxim, thank you.
Yes, I would like just to jump in and, to thank you on my own behalf, because I am here in Ukraine all the time. I'm the witness to everything that's happening, and, to all these horrific things, and which only reinvigorates the amount of gratitude I could possibly have towards people like you, and other members of now quite small, but already the club of those people who came to our podcast, for you to finding motivation and need in the first place to come to Ukraine and to help us out. So I just want everybody to know that all Ukrainians feel that way, and that we thank you all for being involved with us, and for helping us. And your work does not go unnoticed. So there's just a couple of words I would like to expand.
It's easy to help a country as great as you guys, as Ukraine. It doesn't feel like work, and so yeah, no, I appreciate it, but no, your country is so incredible. It's very worth everything, every sacrifice. Yeah.
Thank you. That means the world. Thank you.
Дякую тобі.
Будь ласка.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for listening. Follow for more. Follow Christian on his social media and follow his organization to help him save more lives. So thank you so much for listening, and see you at the next episode.